Welcome, welcome, welcome to another live reading. This is Friday night's live reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth, written by Monica Shu and Barbara Moore. Um, I am Angel with Heart and Soul Studios, and I don't have much to say. I'll just say that I continue to say the format every week. And that is one where, this is a thick book, so we want to get I'm really wanting to get through it. We've gotten through a lot. But so with that being said, you can treat this as an audio book where you can mute yourself. We don't need to have any videos or anything like that. You can continue to do what you do as you listen to the reading. And then I usually save about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the reading to just take some comments or reactions, questions, what have you. All right, so this week we are picking up. Oh, I must say though that this time I have a little grandbaby, right? And so I may have to cut the reading short because she might not let me finish. So hopefully we will go the normal 8:30 to like 10:15, if she allows. But yeah, so this week we are picking up at the chapter entitled Goddess of the Witches. Goddess of the Witches. Okay. Diana Artemis, goddess of the witches, was the great goddess of the legendary Amazons, the wise women and women warriors of an ancient Thrace, Macedonia, North and West Coast Africa, Libya. She was queen of heaven, the pure huntress of the moon, and the protectress of wild animals. She was a lesbian, scornful of men, and her followers were young women. No man could enter her temple. No man could enter her temple. As the moon, she rides the clouds, very cool, untouched by man, filling the nights with psychic brilliance. But she was also Asiatic Artemis, the orgiastic and many-breasted mother of all. In this form, she was honored at the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, built by Amazons and considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. And after this temple was destroyed by fire, Amazons built it up again. In her third form, she was Hecate, dark goddess of the night sky, giver of plagues and sudden death. Hecate worshipped at midnight at the crossroads. All these paradoxical aspects were hers, as the moon has changing faces. All these paradoxical aspects were hers, as the moon has changing faces. Diana, the virgin huntress, untouched by men, was also the goddess of childbirth. Legendarily, Diana was born of her mother without pain, and she taught women the techniques of painless childbirth. She was a midwife. Her Her cult had major Bronze Age centers throughout the Mediterranean at Marseilles, Syracuse, and Ephesus. Her temple at Ephesus was built by Amazons circa 900 BC. After destruction by fire, it was rebuilt by another generation of women warriors. This temple was in the beehive shape. And at this beehive temple, Dianic rites were conducted by um, Melissal priestesses or worker bees and self-castrated Essene priests or drones. Here was the famous image of Black Diana. A small shrine on her head, the Diope, contained a magic stone, possibly a very old Neolithic implement. This statue was smashed to pieces in 400 by a Christian who boasted that he had finally torn down the demon Diana. In Rome, Diana was the protectress of the plebeians, and in particular, the guardian of slaves, outlaws, and thieves. Her temple stood in their city quarters, the Aventine. Roman slaves celebrated Diana's festivals in mid-August, which is also the sacred festival day of Hecate and of the Irish triple goddess Bridget. To the Christians, Diana, the moon, was the devil incarnate. Ninth century church fathers in Europe condemned deluded women who believe that in the dead of night they ride upon certain beasts with Diana or the witch queen Herodias and fly through the sky among multitudes of women. Long into the Renaissance, she was imaged as a terrible demon. Christians sometimes call the devil Lucifer. Lucifer, the quote, light bringer, unquote, was in early legend Diana's twin brother, the morning star. The morning star, also the evening star, is Venus, which, along with the moon, was observed with very accurate calculations by ancient astronomers worldwide. To the Aztecs, it was Quetzalcoatl. To the Mayans, Kukulkan. Okay. To the Mayans, Kukulkan. To the Sumerians and Babylonians, it was Inanna Ishtar. Whenever Christians encountered astronomical astrological observations and texts on Venus and the moon, they saw only devil worship. Hence, they destroyed library after library containing ancient wisdom and knowledge, including the Mayan astronomical library at Mani, as well as the Library of Alexandria. Mayan astronomical knowledge was probably the most advanced in the ancient world. They invented the zero long before the Arabs did. In 1552, the Spanish friar Diego de Landa, confronting all these texts containing Mayan intellectual brilliance as well as spiritual data, stated that they contained nothing in which there was not to be seen superstitions and lies of the devil, and so we burned them all. Early Christian smashing of Dianic cults in the Mediterranean, as well as later church persecutions of witches in Europe, must be seen in this global context. Wherever Christians saw knowledge, like herbal, medical, astronomical, symbolical, they saw demonism and moved to destroy it. The witch persecutions were not simply aimed at devil worshippers, but at ancient human knowledge of the world. Another group of Amazons and witch women was centered around what is now Morocco in Northwest Africa. They called their moon hunters goddess Anath. They called their moon huntress goddess Anatha, a name related to the Egyptian goddess Neith and the Greek Athene. The Amazon tribes in this area were also called, the Amazon tribes in this area were called Gorgons. One of their queens was named Medusa, and their warrior goddess Anatha wore the original legendary Aegis, a goatskin chastity tunic, along with a Gorgon mask and a leather pouch containing a sacred serpent. Probably all the Amazons or moon women wore these magical belts, and any man who removed one without the wearer's consent would be killed. The Greek legends of heroes slaying the Gorgon and the snake-haired Medusa could derive from actual battles fought by patriarchal Greek soldiers against these women's cultures, just as Greek males fought Macedonian Amazons on the Greek homeland. The Gorgon is a very moon-faced woman with her tongue stuck out. Even though the later Athene became the goddess of the Greek patriarchal state, and in Greek drama was portrayed as siding with the new father right against the ancient mother goddess religion, still she always in her statues carried the Aegis, still she always in her statues carried the Aegis with a Gorgon's head on it as her shield. Northwest African warrior women wearing a magic belt with a pouch suspended from it containing a sacred serpent sounds very close to the Dahomean goddess, the black witch Mawulisa, who was bisexual and carried a snake in her belly. And to corroborate the legends that ancient matriarchal Africans sailed to Central America, Frank Waters in Mexico Mystique mentions this interesting information. In the Mayan temple of the sun at Palenque is a carved tablet identified by the Pythagoreans as the aegis of Zeus, who stole it from Athene. The aegis shows the Gorgon head with tassels that Homer described as Athene's shield, and it is backed by the carved numerals 77, the magic number of the Egyptian goddess Neith. The original witch was undoubtedly black, bisexual, a warrior, a wise and strong woman, also a midwife, also a leader of her tribe. The many faces of the moon. The nature of the goddess was in no way the pale, meek, mild, and solely maternal one that has been associated with femininity in patriarchal culture. The goddess of unrestrained sexual love, Astarte, Ishtar, Ashtoreth, or Sybil, was also associated with war and death, with natural magic and primal wildness. She was also a mother and a helper of women in childbirth. Under the Greco Roman and Hebrew Christian patriarchy in the West, these many aspects were separated out into the good woman stereotype of the Virgin Mary versus the bad woman Eve. She was the love goddess, or the good mother, or the hag of death, or the virgin huntress, but never again all. It can be hard for us to remember that the original goddess was not a fixed dualism, but a revolving triplicity. She of the moon changes, whether she is seen as the benevolent mother of all living, or the goddess of bloody battle, or the death goddess, or the prophetic witch. The attitude toward life in matriarchal society remains the same. All life is created out of the mother and is one with her. Therefore, no life can be taken without her permission. All lifeblood belongs to her and must be returned to the earth sacredly. And so life can only be taken in the form of ritual individual sacrifice. This is how and why ritual sacrifice could occur among people who were not bloody savages. They did not kill either at a logically rationalized distance by machine. Ritual death happened up close by a living, bloody, and responsible hand. When the biblical Hebrews opposed ritual human sacrifice, they were on the right evolutionary track. Human beings needed to go beyond that. But to replace ritual, individual sacrifice with mass random slaughter by mechanized weaponry in the ideological name of holy war or modern political war was no advance. At least the ancient ritualists knew what they were doing and took responsibility for each kill. Every human is born from a woman. And so, in a society ruled by the council of older women, meeting at night in the moonlight after the day's work was done, it was not possible to see human beings in terms of statistics and ideological units, as so much raw material to be used and manipulated as is the case in patriarchal societies. Sacrifice was voluntary and service was seen as mutual. And as among the American Iroquois, even the male war chief or chief of hunting was not free to make his own specialist decisions about life and death. He was bound to abide by the decisions of the Council of Women, the mothers of life and death. Next chapter, Crete and the Bronze Age. Crete was the last full flowering of the matriarchal culture. We are taught that Western civilization begins with Greece, but in fact, the imagination of the Greeks came from Crete. All Greek religious ritual, all Greek mythology was of Cretan, Mycenaean origin. Rites performed at Eleusis in utter secrecy were, in earlier Crete, celebrated in sacred groves. The ecstasy cult of Dionysus originated in Crete. It was the cult of the great goddess, Lady of the Beasts, surrounded by her wild dancing women. Later, as bacchantes, these ivy chewing women performed the death and resurrection ritual of her son Dionysus, Bacchus. Most of the later famous Greek goddesses originated in Crete. In fact, the whole progress of classic Greek mythology involved breaking down the one original great goddess into her many aspects and stereotyping these into the partial goddesses that we have come to know. Aphrodite, the love goddess; Athene, the goddess of wisdom; Demeter, the mother; Persephone, the daughter; Artemis, the virgin huntress; Hecate, the death crone. In these partial forms, the goddesses were often set at war with each other, as in the Trojan legend when Paris was asked to choose which one of the three, Hera, Athene, or Aphrodite, was most beautiful. His choice precipitated a war. This story is a paradigm of how the Greek male mind in the rising patriarchy played with women and with the ancient goddess, breaking her into fragments and then setting the fragments against each other in jealous bickering. Greek mythology is full of this intellectual game, revealing the detachment of the Greek mind from what had once been sacred. Under the original Great Mother religion, this fragmentation could not happen, for each different face of the goddess was recognized as an aspect of the one being. The great goddess of Crete is familiar. Statues show her standing in a flounced skirt with bare breast, Here, ecstatic, holding up coiling snakes in both hands. She was worshipped among early agricultural peoples of the Mediterranean region and Southwest Asia. In Northwest Coast Africa, she was called Ngame. Her cult was perhaps carried to Crete in ancient times by Anatolian settlers from the Asiatic mainland, or it might have originated in Africa or in Thrace. The wonderful flounced skirt was worn by both the Maltese and Sumerian goddess. The Cretan goddess is one with the Ephesian Artemis the many-breasted, with Ishtar of Babylon, with the triple goddess Morgan of Ireland, with Mawu Lisa the black witch carrying the snake in her belly, with the great mother of the Paleolithic caves. She almost always appeared with serpents, with bare breasts, and with the moon. She was the first god, always one. The great goddess kept her supremacy throughout the Mediterranean, the Aegean, Turkey, and the Near East, Northwest Africa, and Europe through Neolithic times until the very end, the Bronze Age, in changing forms. She survived into the rise of high civilization in Crete when a form of class society developed based on a palace culture of advanced technology but still patterned on the matrilineal family. There are no figures of male gods in all of Cretan culture, even into the predominantly patriarchal, warring, and priest ridden world of the Bronze Age. The Cretans, unlike most of their contemporaries, had no temple or temple figures. Their sanctuaries were in the countryside. They worshipped among sacred trees. And even as they celebrated the birth of the young male god Dionysus, in the birth cave, he was always known as the son of the Great Mother. The rites involved hiding and protecting him from the cannibalistic wrath of the neighboring father god who saw him as a rival for power. Dionysus was raised among women, dressed as a woman, as an ecstatic shaman, and he represents the naturally androgynous nature of the true son who identifies with the mother. As G. Rachel Levy wrote, the Cretans developed a religion unusually detached from formal bonds, but emotionally binding in its constant endeavor to establish communion with the elemental powers. Perhaps this was the reason why they never built temples, but performed their rites through the most splendid epochs of their material achievement on mountain peaks, in caves, in household chapels, and rustic shrines. Their ritual remained primitive, preserving its relations with cavern, pillar, goddess, and tree so that they could draw profoundly on the past and bequeath something fundamental to their more intellectual successors. Okay. The Cretans appear to have been gentle, joyous, sensuous, and peace loving. From the evidence of ruins, they maintained, like the Maltese Islanders, at least 1,000 years of culture unbroken by war. The only other peoples we know of with such a long peace record, e.g., those of the Indus Valley and southern India, was also mother goddess cultures. In Crete, the uncovering of the breast was a sacred gesture, symbolizing the nourishing life stream of the mother. The goddess was the one whose godhead, single in essence but of many forms with varied rites and under many names, the whole earth reveres. In later times, her young son emerges as a deity, the leader and an embodiment of the war dancing Curetes. I was just looking at some the imagery caught me off guard. I'll just go ahead and show. This is some art from Cretan times. No, this is not art from Cretan times. I'm sorry. This is art from actually one of the authors. I'm sorry. This is Monica. But the imagery really just called to me. So just thought I'd share real quick. Okay. All the Cretan rites included ecstatic dancing and mystery, and in the Dionysian rituals, these trance-inducing activities were not intended to prepare actual warriors, but to defend the spirit of the mother's young son from the rising patriarchy. At first, the Indo-European sky god Zeus was identified with the young Cretan god. Zeus, introduced into Greek Mycenaean mythology by nomadic pastoral invaders from the north, called Aryans by some historians. They could have come from the Russian steppes. Among Greeks, Zeus was the first seen as a serpent god, a consort of the goddess and manifestation of her power. In reliefs and seals, he was imaged as a serpent. When the young Zeus Dionysus was born and concealed in a Cretan cave on Mount Ida, the holy rite of the new birth involved all the people in celebration. The Curetes danced and beat their shields, figure eight shaped shields ornamented with serpents and spirals, to help save the child from his devouring father bent on secular power. All this was an accepted part of Greek mythology, but influenced by the solar cults and Apollonian rationalism, classic Greeks elevated the sacrificial son to Olympian immortality, just as early Christians here do with Jesus. Eventually, the story of Zeus's birth and death in a Cretan cave as the son of the Great Mother was denied as heresy by the Greeks. There's a striking difference between the colorfully flowing and curving wall paintings and pottery ornaments of the Cretans and those of the Bronze Age Babylonian palaces and huge temples, all bearing angular, rigid, and aggressive scenes of warfare, enslavement, and the hunt. These Babylonian architectures were setting a new patriarchal standard the world was soon to follow. But whatever is gracious and beautiful in Greek art derived not from patriarchal style, but from the early Cretans. At the service of the Great Mother of Mount Cithaeron on Crete, the whole of creation was believed to stir, live, and dance. The Great Mother's mountain flame was kept alive by nymphs in torchlight dances and winding mountain processions. There was a ritual feast of raw flesh and a long magical sleep of initiation in the cave, a visionary trance and rebirth. Funerary rites expressed the concept of rebirth through the mother. Blood sacrifice of the bull was performed by priestesses with the ceremonial labrys. The palaces contained pillar crypts where offerings were made, and the pillar, as a symbol of the goddess, was anointed with perfumed oils. In the low, dimly lit throne room of Knossos were stone basins, and the throne was flanked by griffin murals. The palace of Knossos is a vast labyrinth in its design. Labyrinth names its hall of double axes, the ceremonial axe of the goddess. Cretan art and religion were a vivid celebration of life. The goddess was joyously worshipped as the Lady of the Beast. Reliefs, paintings, frescoes, and countless seals depict her on mountaintops, surrounded by her wild animals or carrying magic snakes in her uplifted arms. In Cretan homes, walls and ceiling were lavish with flowing lines and bright curves, plants and flowers, birds and forest animals, and sea creatures. Purple octopi. Cretans were mariners, traveling and trading as far as Scandinavia, Ireland, Syria, and Northwest Africa. Traces of their art and influence were carried over the seas. They worshipped cowrie shells and other vulva like sea shapes of the goddess. These sea spirals and convolutions were universal symbols of female creation and organic growth, of eternal continuity and change. The cowrie in Africa retained its symbolic value in patriarchal times, being used as money. In Buddhist Tantra, spiral shells are symbols of the root mantra Om. No one knows what happened to Crete. Its bright millennium of matriarchal culture ended suddenly and mysteriously with no clear sign of a cause. There is no evidence of war or invasion. Some believe it ended in earthquake and flood. Robert Graves speculates that Crete was the legendary Atlantis. Mm. The Bronze Age marks a revolution in social organization. There was a break with the religion of the megalith builders. The great goddess still ruled, but no longer supreme. Her son/lover became more and more a dominating war god and father god, taking over some of her functions and powers as his busy priest remade the old mythologies into his new image. In this, they had the help of alphabets and script writing invented by women of goddess cultures. The transition from matriarchal to patriarchal organization seems to have come about in Mesopotamia as elsewhere through the political social revolt of the queen's consort. She traditionally conferred executive powers on him by allowing him to adopt her names, robes, and sacred instruments and regalia. For example, the widespread custom of the king wearing artificial breasts and long robes, acting as sacred agent of the goddess. Wow. The crown on his head was the crown of birth from the goddess, as babies are still said to crown at birth. When the king revolts against his sacred role in order to exploit the secular power of the matriarchal domain, the mother goddess religion begins to be distorted. We see the rise of the father god as secular male usurpation of social, political, and economic power, as well as a rewriting of all the old mythologies. With the decay of matriarchal cultures, the mystery rites lost their pristine significance as female participation in a female universe. The relation of women worshippers to the young male god, grown from the goddess's infant son to an adolescent to a war god, changes. The relation of son to mother becomes misconstrued as that of a lover to a bride, then a dominating lord to a servant. Okay, so it went from, so let me say that again. The relation of son to mother becomes misconstrued as that of a lover to a bride, then a dominating lord to a servant. And the wild women, dance companions of the androgynous Dionysus, are legalized into submission, becoming weak and fawning followers of a macho warrior godhead or a crucified Christ who denies the mother. There was an era before the patriarchal revolution took effect when women and men cooperated in equality, producing and creating and worshiping together. The son of the mother was her mature lover and mate. Wherever the worship of the Great Mother occurred, ritual emphasis was on the sacredness of life. Sexual union fuses the separate emanations of the divine. And so, sexual rites, worship, and ceremonial union, not to be confused with fertility rites, were a part of her mysteries everywhere. The hero's gamos, which means sacred marriage, between a high priestess representing the goddess and the sacrificial year king, a later permanent king, is, however, no older than circa 6500 BC to our knowledge. But the idea of a sacred mating between new initiates and the ritual priestess or priest still lives among some witches. With patriarchy, this ceremonial view of sexual union ends. Patriarchy is based on secular, not sacred relationships and on property possession, which utterly excludes the experience of ecstatic communion. It is also of course, based on sexual passivity, weakness, and dependence of women. The sacred marriage becomes the ugly business of domination and humiliation between the sheets, or in the harem, the male paradise filled with sexual slaves. And now the sacred relation of mother child is closed indoors, psychologized, and publicly diminished as the child comes to be viewed, like the wife, as part of the father's property, neither having social, economic, or political rights except through him. With patriarchy, we are in the world of male display, with males strutting and busting, strutting and boasting before each other and women and children, as well as religious and cultural artifacts existing solely as material items in the assembled wealth. Next chapter, Tantra and the world's spine. What remains? Many real things. Witchcraft in the Western world, our indigenous goddess religion. In the East, in Tantra Yoga, and to some degree in Taoism, survives some of the ancient matriarchal beliefs, techniques, and ritual worship. The female energy symbolism used by Tantrika, the vulva, caves, the earth, the community of women, can be traced back to the Paleolithic cave culture of 30,000 BC. Probably in ancient times, the special potency of Tantra was transmitted through a female line of power holders, a mysterious sect of women called the Vryatras. I mean, Vratias. I hope I'm saying that right. Called the Vratias. This female transmission of the tradition would account for the way in which female energy symbolism has survived in later religions such as Tibetan Buddhism and Brahmanical monastic Tantra, which are otherwise male oriented in their dogma and not at all likely to have discovered the female principle for themselves. All such transmission was bound to have happened entirely outside the Hindu caste system, which depends on strict adherence to patriarchal rule for its existence. The Sanskrit word for caste, 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 varha means color. The Hindu concept of lawlessness originally meant the corruption of women. Wait, let me say that again. The Hindu concept of lawlessness originally meant the corruption of women, which was believed to lead to social chaos or caste mixture. So, female tantric practitioners and transmitters would have been outcasts and considered defiled. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so let me say it. So female tantric practitioners and transmitters would have been seen as outcasts and considered defiling as sexual partners. Okay. The Tantra was originally matriarchal, emerging from and belonging to the collective, classless early goddess society of the Dravidians. India was invaded circa 3000 BC by the lighter skinned Aryans or Indo Europeans from the north, who went on to conquer the darker skinned, matriarchal, agricultural Dravidians, ending at least 1,000 years of peaceful cultural development in southern India. The Aryans called themselves the people of the sky, inherently light, good, superior, and mighty. And the dark-skinned Dravids they called the people of the earth and of the serpent, inherently dark, evil, weak, inferior, etc. Danu or Diti, the great goddess of the non-Aryan Dravids, was the cow goddess of India. She was undoubtedly related to the European goddess Danu, who gave her name to the Russian river Don, to the German Danube, and was the goddess of the Irish Tuatha De Danann. In Indian mythology, she was murdered by the god Indra, which means he who overthrows cities, who was the god of the invaders. Danu and her son Vitra are first described as serpent demons, later as they lie dead as cow and calf. After Indra's murder of Danu, it was said that the cosmic waters flowed and were pregnant with her blood, giving birth to the son of the new patriarchal order and its Brahmanic elite. Following this conquest, over the ages, the male Aryans established the caste system, the most powerful among them establishing themselves as the light Brahmins class at the top. They placed tight restrictions on the women in order to preserve their own racial purity, property line, and privilege through the patriarchal family. Purda, women's imprisonment, Purda means women's imprisonment in the domestic sphere, and harems of wives were introduced later by the Muslims. The priestly Brahmin caste presided over the temples and ritual worship and laws of hierarchic social conduct. A Brahmin was considered pure, and to maintain his purity, he had to be protected from all other work. The next class, the warriors, were good for nothing but war. The work of society was carried out by the lower castes and by the untouchables whose duty it was to empty the latrines and do the cleaning. These untouchables were the original dark-skinned matriarchal Dravidians in the new patriarchal order assigned the role of housemaid or wife. Brahmins are called the twice-born, i.e., reborn out of the father. This is the aim of men's initiation rites all over the world, to incorporate the boy child into the world of the fathers while exercising all memory of the child's bond with the mother, a bond that is both erotic and mystical and thus a challenge to established power. The Indian mystic Tagore spoke often of the Shakti power of the female. In our language, we call women's power over men Shakti. If Shakti disappears, the creative force in society is inhibited. The men lose their virility and become mechanical in their habits. If Shakti disappears, the creative force in society is inhibited. The men lose their virility and become mechanical in their habits. He believed that the relation between the sexes in India under patriarchal religion was so distorted that the Shakti power could not function. Distinguished contemporary Tantrika have stated their belief that many of the miseries in modern India are caused by the world hatred that traditional Brahmin philosophers have instilled into the majority of the population. World hatred is designed to make people accept miserable conditions and injustice as though these were functions of life itself rather than specific results of specific man made systems, such as the caste system in India. A good deal of India's suffering, like that of most of the world, results from Western imperialism and exploitation of native labor and resources. But such Indian problems as child marriage, dowry murders, and the ritual burning of widows cannot be blamed on modern European imperialism. The burning alive of so many young brides by husbands' families dissatisfied with dowry payments comes directly from patriarchal religion's devaluation of women into property. Yes. Dowry murder among lower caste Indians seems to have replaced the long-standing custom of widow burning, now illegal, which was practiced by the wealthier upper classes. Why? In Suti custom, Suti means the ritual burning of widows. Okay, so why in Suti custom, with the immolation of the widow on her husband's funeral pyre, the Brahmin priesthood inherited all the worldly property of the couple. Thus, no upper class wealth or land could ever pass into the hands of women. In the same way, the land and goods of every European burned as a heretic or witch during 5 centuries of Inquisition passed directly into the hands of the Christian church. Uh, in the same way, the land and good of every European burned as a heretic or witch during 5 centuries of Inquisition passed directly into the hands of the Christian church. There was a lot of property, much of it still held by the various denominations. Thus does the patriarchal priesthood consolidate its earthly domains. Living traces of the ancient Aboriginal matriarchal people can still be found in India. The Purja of the South still do not farm the soil, but only burn wood and sow in the ashes. Purja women wear no veils and remain proud, sexually free, and strong. The matriarchal Nayar people of Kerala in South and Southern India enjoy high culture, no poverty, no prostitution. They practice gift exchange economy and are noted for their highly educated and active women. The Indian women's art of yogic massage, practiced on babes from 1 month and small children, originated in Kerala. It has been handed down through generations of women. In this massage, the left hand is dynamic energy, the right hand is static energy. The exercises require great strength and sensitivity, the women's hands, joined with controlled breathing, communicating intelligence, dignity, freedom, power, and tenderness. A cosmic dance emerging from the rhythmic movement, a silent dialogue of love and union between mother and child, is designed to open the child's joints and release the sensuous power of life. This is done by all animal mothers, in fact, when they lick their newborn intensely immediately after birth. The sexual misers and misogynists of Buddhism, practicing a secret and dangerous self indulgence in the form of spiritual nihilism, leading to institutionalized sadism, neglect, and hatred of their fellow creatures, are very similar to the patriarchal monastic Christian world of the European Middle Ages. Both terrible worldviews show the fallacy involved in any assertion of the nature of being Brahma or Christ God, which fails to take into account, first of all, that which is and its relation to human life. The nihilistic incapacity to say yes instead of no comes from the incapacity to recognize the female principle at the source of being. The Tantrika, on the other hand, teach that pleasure, vision, and ecstasy should be cultivated and used by all, not suppressed and damned, not hoarded for the corrupt thrills of the few. Tantra proclaims that all things, the crimes and pains, as well as the joys and benefits of life, are the active play of the female creative principle, the goddess of many forms, sexually penetrated by an invisible, indescribable seminal male. The used um, Tantrika used prolonged acts of ecstatic meditation and sexual union with a partner. They use liturgies, mantras, inner visualizations, yogic postures, and manipulation of the joined female and male energies. The goddess is perceived as the energy which makes real the outer and inner worlds. The complementary images of object and subject, spinning them out from the steel center as a spider spins a web from her body into the open space of being. In tantric thought, creation is time. The goddess in her function as measurer weaves the substance of events in time, just as she does in space. Time is the field of the goddess's play. While manifest in form, she is also potential energy, the yet unrealized. In this sense, she is void, the void, because what contains everything specific cannot be in itself specific. Yet this voidness is not the Brahmanic abstraction of being, which is presented as somehow superior to immersion in life. Brahmins preach that the psychic lunar body is to be transcended, that all formal consciousness is to be transcended and despised. Such an attitude carried about by real men in the position of dominating real life can be devastating. The void of the goddess is the real energy potential of the as yet unmanifest, and it is the ultimate relation or union of all manifest energies. Individual consciousness is released from the prison of dualism through realizing that she, he is one with both principles. Tantra exists in a patriarchal world, however, and has for a long time, and so its doctrine has been accordingly modified. Today, it believes that the ultimate still center is not the yoni of the female, but the self originated lingam, male seed in parentheses. Tantrika say that the lingam conveys into all Kali's play activity the seed of being hidden beyond and within. Originally, though, there is no doubt that the still center of the universal spiral is, as it always was, the female yoni, the womb tomb of the Great Mother. And there is no doubt that the origin of energy is the spiraling Kundalini serpent who lives in the human spine, the sexual energy that powers flight. Many Westerners have turned to India for the study of Tantra and the Kundalini power because here the ancient techniques have been most completely retained. Was there ever anything like them in the West indigenous to Western people? The answer is yes, because the same goddess ruled all. The Dravidian Danu was the Irish Danu. The Indian Kali was the Irish Kalich, both portrayed sitting in the lotus posture. As William Irwin Thompson points out, the religion of the Upper Paleolithic is not simply the parochial superstitions of one tribe, it is the first universal religion, and its universality as an iconic system based upon the mysteries of menstruation and a lunar calendar cuts across cultures with different languages or toolkits. It is a universal religion whose range of influence, even in the Upper Perigordian, extends from Spain to Central Asia. By the time of the Neolithic, it had diffused throughout Africa and Eurasia. And by the Middle Neolithic period, at least it had everywhere developed techniques of ecstasy and illumination. Some of these techniques, especially related to shamanism and drug use, were kept alive by European paganism and witchcraft. Others can be reconstructed and revived through study of Kundalini yoga and tantric techniques while remaining dubious of the patriarchal doctrines that have accumulated around them. The ancient holism must be reconstructed in our own minds, by our own minds, helped by historic knowledge and imagination. Remember the snake and bird goddess worshipped as early as no, so yes, remember the snake and God I'm sorry, remember the snake and bird goddess worshipped as early as 6500 BC throughout southeastern and central Europe. To the later patriarchal Indo European pastoral nomads, the earth was the receptive great mother corresponding to their active sky father. But the Neolithic agricultural matriarchal people had created the original maternal image composed of both water and air divinities as well as earth. The snake and bird goddess, a three-part totality. Who was she? She was the three-part human brain. She was the world tree, the world spine, with the snake and the bird as the lower and upper symbols. Where they appear, it is understood that the arousal of Kundalini up the spine through the chakras connects to them. In Mediterranean and European imagery, the divine child or green child was the reborn energy created in this mystic magical process. This reborn energy was imaged as the cub of the wild bear mother, the baby snake or baby bird of the snake and bird goddess. The green child, which is reborn psychic energy, was not reared by the earth mother, but by the wild goddess Artemis. European paganism, like all others, always understood natural wildness as spiritual energy, the clue to illumination. Religious technique is not meant to tame this energy with moralism, but to channel it with creative understanding, which comes from the human neocortex. Variations of the snake and bird goddess appear everywhere, even in places we might not at first recognize. Their universal similarities are not accidental, but the evidence of a universal idea, a universal recognition. In India and China, the world tree is the lotus. In Mexico and Central America, it was a jungle tree topped with the quetzal bird. Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec god of learning and peace, was imaged as a feathered serpent winding about a world tree. To teach the snake how to rise up the trunk to become a bird or a plumed serpent, a Quetzalcoatl, is how yoga was expressed in ancient Mexico. The Mayan Kukulkan, or the Mayan Kukulkan was the same. Both gods were Venus, the morning and evening star. In Egypt, in the religion of Isis and Osiris, Kundalini rising up the spine is symbolized by raising the Jed pillar of Osiris. As Thompson notes, in Gnosticism also, the mind is called serpent formed. There was a universal recognition symbolized in all these snake tree bird iconographies that the human mind is not fully activated until the serpent energy is brought up the world tree spine to flood the brain with illumination. The energy of the reptilian dream brain powers the soaring bird of the neocortex. If it doesn't, the neocortex functions only as an intellectual mechanism. In all these symbols is a genetic memory of evolution and evidence of the ancient people's worldwide knowledge of yoga techniques. What is expressed in the lotus, the plumed serpent, or the staff of Osiris is the yogi's knowledge of the three brains of man. Except that the techniques were developed by women, devotees of their own processes and of the world's first and universal religion. It is women, remember, whose brains are evolutionarily structured to experience sexual and spiritual illumination as one. This is what the snake and bird goddess meant, symbolized. And the Thracian Maenads and all other legendary schools of priestesses in service to the goddess were guardians of these original yogic shamanic techniques. In pagan Scandinavia, shamanism was originally practiced by the priestesses of Freya, and they wore magic bird costumes belonging to her. With these, they flew into other realities. And on the cavern ceiling of the Paleolithic Hall of Hieroglyphs at Pec Merle, France, are the images of three dancing women. Two are headless, one has the stylized head of a bird. She has been called by art historian Siegfried Gideon the earliest known representation of the fusion of a human being with an animal. The consistency and ancientness of these images of ecstatic dancing and the pulling of the serpentine biomystical energies of the human spine to achieve wings or illuminated consciousness argues for an intuitive knowledge of shamanic yogic techniques among our earliest ancestors. They were the techniques of the religion of the Great Mother. Thompson describes how these techniques were desecrated by the literalism of male priesthoods in service to secular power. In the Yoga of Quetzalcoatl, the initiate spoke of the opening of the heart to the light of the sun, and what was meant by this was the opening of the chakras in the subtle body. The Aztec priests took the esoteric words literally, ripping out the victim's physical heart and holding it up to the sun. Such a grotesque, literalist misreading of esoteric spiritual texts is at the heart of fundamentalist fanaticism in all religions and of all holy wars. In ancient Mexico, the priests conducting mass heart ripping sacrifices day after day were no longer in service, needless to say, of individual spiritual illumination. They were trying to keep a giant patriarchal religious military machine running using buckets of blood as fuel, using the fearful resignation of the people as fuel. Bronze Age priesthoods throughout the Near East, the Mediterranean, and Europe entered upon the same gruesome project. As patriarchal governmental, military, and architectural systems grew into gigantic edifices of stone representing secular power, crazed priests called for blood, sacrifice, castration in the name of terrifying aspects of the Great Mother. They begin to rule by fear alone, their own fears stimulating the fears of the multitudes. In atmospheres of mass fear, mass human sacrifice begins to make a kind of numbing sense. The real fear is stimulated by buildup of secular power, signalized by military power in the hands of a human elite. People tend to respond to this by perpetuating their gods. Among the European Celtic peoples, the Druid priesthood inherited the magic shamanic techniques as well as the alphabet of the earlier goddess religion. They organized a spiritual technology that involved transcendent power of themselves alone and so violated the cosmic law of the mother, which demands recycling on all levels, including the spiritual. Under threat of Roman invasion and the breakup of their world, the Druid priests, like the Aztecs, ended up performing more and more bloody mass sacrifice with less result. With the Indo European infiltration of southern and central Europe circa 4000 BC, the snake and bird goddess begins to disappear. Her triple aspect disappears, her sky aspect disappears, and the mother is deprived of her ancient bisexual nature. As shamanism and bisexuality always go together, this means the disappearance of the shamanic techniques or their absorption into the new male dominance religion as secret power tools of a ruling elite. The snake, tree, bird goddess, the multidimensional she of water, earth, and air becomes, under the patriarchal Indo Europeans, the monodimensional gi, flat on her back, passive receptacle of male seed. Earth Mother who never flies and the magic dies. That's really interesting, but I can totally see that. Yeah, I agree. I can totally see that as well. During the long millennia of the Upper Paleolithic and the Neolithic, our human ancestors, led by women, developed communal meditation techniques which led to individual knowledge and experience of human psychic powers. With the agricultural buildup of the mid Neolithic, increasingly complex settlement and specialization, these techniques and powers became increasingly the secret knowledge of a spiritual elite, a priesthood, just as the Neolithic increase of material abundance gave rise to a ruling secular elite, a palace royalty. This combined royal priestly elite, armed with the new class of professional warriors, saw clearly how this communal wealth of humanity, the earthly abundance and the spinal spiritual knowledge, could be appropriated and exploited for the elite's advantage and toward the profitable enslavement of the masses of people. The Bronze Age represents this elite co optation of communal female invention by the male few in power. Royalty, priests, warriors, and other specialists took the life technologies, arts, symbols, yogic shamanic techniques, and total agricultural wealth developed by the female collective by thousands of generations of human cooperation and exploration and absorb them into the new patriarchal class system with the king and priest on top, guarded by the professional warriors who began systematically to visit the wrath of God, i.e., the religion of plunder, rape, and conquest. On the masses of newly disinherited and powerless common people, i.e., those who had once lived quite happily together in common. War was declared on the human body with the emergence of patriarchal warrior societies in the Bronze Age. War was declared on the human body by declaring war on the female body, on the reproductive bodies of women, on the fertile body of Mother Earth, on the body of knowledge and techniques accumulated by women over the generations. Just as universal legends tell of males banding together to steal fire from the women who collectively discovered its magic uses, just as Pythagoras stole manad trans knowledge of rhythm and mathematical signs to invent an objective number system used as a logical weapon against ancient female holism, just so the Bronze Age patriarchies stole the practical and spiritual inventions of the female sex and the female god and turned them into power weapons, which have been used ever since to make the few rich and the many impoverished. To give males a pathetic illusion of freedom via the enslavement of females. To give men the delusion of mental superiority via the total historical plundering of the female brain. To speak continuous slogans of progress and civilization while the entire human race is dragged evolutionarily backward into the dominance submission systems of the primates. The magic, sexual, spiritual techniques of the snake and bird goddess still remain on earth in traces, even though she is forgotten. Even the co opted goddess Athena of classical Greece, though proclaimed motherless and reborn from the forehead of Zeus the father, still wore the magic bird wings and the sacred snake coils of ancient matriarchy, even though we no longer know what they mean. In the time falling bodies take to light, that's a book. It's the name again is The Time Falling Bodies Take to Light. In this book, Thompson refers to the male horror of returning to the matriarchy, of returning to the female communal order of the past. No matter how bad things get in the modern world, and how much worse can they get? Men and women are still conditioned by all patriarchal, political, religious, economic, and cultural institutions to believe that humanity is much better off now than we ever were in the dark, inchoate, and anonymous red female. They put that in parentheses, past. The Christian essayist and novelist C.S. Lewis has defined this male nightmare in fastidious words. You might add that in the hive and in the anthill, we see fully realized the two things that some of us most dread for our own species: the dominance of the female and the dominance of the collective. I'm sorry. Well, yeah, he says again, I'm saying again, you might add that in the hive and in the anthill, we see fully realized the two things that some of us most dread for our own species: the dominance of the female and the dominance of the collectivity. Forgetting, of course, that the hive makes honey and that that female collective once made the world. Wow. Okay, this is like part 4. It's patriarchal culture and religion. Dr. B says it is really mind-blowing to continually see as we read how undervalued we've been over many lifetimes. I must agree. I must agree. But most interestingly, I just now, since you said that, I just got to point out that today, um, and this was in the book that we're reading, but it was way earlier. It just, it was brought back up in a conversation that I was having that um with women, again, they established agriculture because as the men would bring back food or meat, um, or animals to be killed, for food for the community, women began to domesticate these animals, again, having them suckle on the breast and things like that. But they began to domesticate the animals. But then they also learned that, oh, these animals could spit out seed. You know, they could breed, basically. They could breed. It came out of that came the first ever surplus on the earth. Like, oh, wait a minute, we don't got to keep traveling. We could just sit here, breathe, and so I mean, exactly, Dr. B. I see you say, wow, exactly. From women came the very first economic surplus. or surplus of any sort. And I just thought that was very interesting because, as you just said, that we've been undervalued for many lifetimes, but there was that, the surplus, there was us with the fire. Men were not allowed to even see women as they were doing their pottery, as we read in the Great Cosmic Mother. It was women who controlled fire. It was, so I'm not gonna keep going, but I just thought that was so, because I think it's like Marxism that says, they try when they're talking about the birth of capitalism, they never dare bring up the fact that women created the first surplus. They never bring that up. You know what I'm saying? But it's crazy. Okay. God as Father. Okay. Now, I remember a lot of this from the first time I read this. And Dr. B says the answer to all, basically, but due to the distorted mindset, it was underutilized. All right. God as Father. If God is the mother of the universe, then the creation is of the same substance as her. It is of her, as the child is of its mother's substance. And this means that the whole creation is divine and divinely related. We should have imagined life as created in the birth pain of God, the mother. Then we would understand that. We would know that our life's rhythm beats from her great heart, torn with agony of love and birth. Then we should understand why we, her children, have inherited pain, and we would feel that death meant a reunion with her, a passing back into her substance, the blood of her blood again, peace of her peace. Wow, let me say that one more time. We should have imagined life as created in the birth pain of God the Mother. Then we would understand that, we would know that our life's rhythm beats from her great heart, torn with agony of love and birth. Then we should understand why we, her children, have inherited pain, and we would feel that death meant a reunion with her, a passing back into her substance, the blood of her blood again, peace of her peace. Human females and males are not equal genetic parents. The female X chromosome is 3 to 4 times longer than the male Y chromosome. It carries the overwhelming preponderance of critical genetic information unrelated to sex needed to create a human being. Further, while only half the population has a Y chromosome, all of us, female and male, contain an X. It is our primary genetic bond as a species. The female egg, even before it mates with the sperm, generates an electrical field that becomes the shaping energy of the embryo as it develops into an independent being. The mother field is both the biological environment and the shaper of form within the environment. These biological facts are also experienced as spiritual facts. But when the cult of the male god was established, there must have been difficulty in explaining how he could be the giver of life to all creation, since the man, unlike the woman, cannot produce from his body either the child or the food for the child. The whole attitude of humans towards the god had to be altered, violently altered. There cannot be that same vital, biological, and magical link, the I, thou, between the child and the father as there is between the child and its mother. Two beings evolving in and from the same body, the same rhythms, the same dreams. From the religious point of view, this means the loss between the human and the divine of direct, continuous, physical, emotional, spiritual relationship. Oneness is dualized. The self is isolated within, and the rest of the universe, including God, is displaced and objectified without. The evolutionary protoplasmic connection between the experienced self and the all is broken, and the new relation becomes I, the other, or worse, I, it. The Father is not of the same all containing, all infusing, shaping, and nourishing substance. And so the relation between humans and the Father God becomes abstract and alienated, distant and moralistic. The abstract God is inorganic, equally inorganic relative to the preceding 300,000 to 500,000 years of communal Stone Age life, was the rigid class system of royal masters served by slave labor that quickly coalesced around the ruling patriarchal elite. The few can rule the many only with the help of punitive religious ideologies by means of which the unjust advantage of the few and the raw exploration, I'm sorry, the few can rule the many only with the help of punitive religious ideologies, by means of which the unjust advantage of the few and the raw exploitation of the many are somehow justified by God by a class theology. And so this new male God must be enforced on the people by the punitive and guilt projecting ideologies of a privileged priesthood. In their writings and doctrines, flooding the Bronze Age, creation now comes to be seen as evil. The Creator is above and apart from his creation, and while he is perfect, the world is flawed. And so the idea of original sin can be conceived for the first time to rationalize the unnatural new relation between the human soul and the aloof God. This lays the basis for all further alienated relationships between people and God, between people and people, between people and the natural world, between rulers and ruled. For now, the primary relation is not that we share the same divine substance, but that we share the same material corruption. And the entire priesthood exists to redeem us from the sin of being born from the mother and to rationalize class disparity by preaching that the new class system is God's design, his method for creating civilized order out of the corruption and chaos of human flesh. For an unjust system to work for any prolonged period of time, it is necessary that the masses of people believe they deserve the injustice. This is why the Father's way in all patriarchal world religions is absolute, so pure, it is separable from us and from the world, and perceptible only through largely verbal abstractions that attempt to describe his emanations or manifested attributes. He is perfect, good, disembodied spirit, the Logos. He is seen as purely spiritual generation, totally freed from matter, because the priest must insist he is free from the Great Mother and having no participation in material processes. It then becomes difficult to explain the existence of death, illness, pain, and decay, since they have nothing to do with God. Rather, it becomes too easy to explain to them. Everything is blamed on the corrupt mother and her human children and her heathenish lover, the devil. It now becomes possible for the Hindu mystic to confuse the goddess as time with evil on the one hand and with the whole natural universe on the other, so making all creation the product of evil while God remains uninvolved. Under ontological dualism, the mind becomes more and more confused by paradox, and to work their way out of their confusion, patriarchal theologians seek abstract escape from the natural world defined as a seductive trap. The world of Maya, or time, is called mere illusion, a veil hiding a veil hiding true being. And so the Hindu, the Buddhist, and the Christian seek liberation from nature in search of a state of consciousness bereft of all sense experience, in parentheses, nirvana or angelic heaven. It was to correct this amaterial floatiness, in fact, that Zen developed out of ancient Taoism to rainest on the reality of the real. Alan Watts in the book Nature, Man, and Woman, describes the ancient female way of fusing spirit and matter into non coercive union, a way of flowing along with events while at the same time cooperatively molding them. It is the way of the dance and the unfolding of plant, animal, and mineral forms, the desire of energy to form itself according to its own rhythms. At some historic point, in an aggressive act of self definition, the male mind interpreted this energy, this organic will, as other and mentally separated himself from it. It became Maya, illusion, evil, mere matter, inferior object. Denying and fighting it, man tries to artificially or ideologically impose his own contrary ego will. In the process, he destroys nature, and thereby, for he too is nature himself. And Taoism says, Tao, there is a thing confusedly formed, born before heaven and earth. Silent and void, it stands alone and does not change, goes round and does not weary. It is capable of being the mother of the world. I know not its name, so I style it the way. I give it the makeshift name of the great. Being great, it is further described as receding. Receding, it is described as far away. Being far away, it is turning back. Tao is that from which one cannot for a single minute depart. That from which one may depart is not Tao. As the Father God is seen as entirely good, light, and static, like the sun at noon, the Hebrews and Christians had to invent the devil. In the Bible, the Old Testament Hebrews refer to Satan, which means enemy. Any enemy of the Hebrews or the Hebrew God was satanic. Early Christians, who were mostly Hebrew and inheritors of the Hebrew tradition, expanded on this quasi political definition of embodied evil until the devil became the source of all things called evil, of decay, darkness, illness, pain, and death. The Jewish Essenes, who were evolving Christian concepts 100 years at least before the reputed birth of Christ, also took in many Persian Zoroastrian concepts of good versus evil as the cosmic battle between light and dark, between the children of light and the children of darkness. And so, an extremely dualistic good light versus evil dark ontology was incorporated as the rational framework of Christianity, with an aloof cloud dwelling God representing all that is good and light, while a very busy world hugging devil represents all the bad, dark stuff. Once Christians had invented this monster, they became totally obsessed with this invention of theirs, fanatically obsessed, since the devil is the curse of those who have abandoned the goddess, and fanaticism is a mental curse. So now the devil is projected on half the world as the other by the crazy half that considers itself good. Islam inherited the same biblical tendency toward dualism and devil projection and has historically elaborated on it also. Under these religious systems, half of life is seen as the enemy of life and is no longer experienced as an inherent and organic part of the life process. In patriarchy, the mater character of the symbol materia is devalued. Matter is no longer revered as the foundation substance of the world of growth and experience. Matter is no longer instituted as an evolutionary phenomena, as a form of spirit energy, as the potentia of consciousness. Matter is now the stupid dark female, despised as something of inferior value in contrast with the male ideal. In Muslim and Christian doctrine, matter has become inert, wholly negative, demonized, and hostile to spirit. In the female world, as opposed to the divine spirit heaven that males are born, I'm sorry. Yeah. Let me say that again. So matter is now the stupid dark female, despised as something of inferior value in contrast with the male ideal. In Muslim and Christian doctrine, matter has become inert, wholly negative, demonized, and hostile to spirit. It is the female world as opposed to the divine spirit heaven that males are born to inherit. With the Industrial Revolution, however, and the rise of science as the dominant patriarchal religion or mind technology, an ironic crossover occurred. Without canceling out the earlier negative associations, materialism becomes the dominant and manly ideology, while spirituality is consigned to an increasingly ethereal, irrelevant, and peripheral sphere of being, the afterworld or feminine vapors. But still, matter is viewed as dumb and inert. Materialism does not glory in matter, but in the male's ability to manipulate it. The new materialism is machine worship and product worship, not the vital and ecstatic celebration of spirit matter that characterized the goddess religion. The current thrust of materialism is to escape the Earth's orbit, to flee the knowledge and the problems of our messy, bloody, hungry, and waste producing bodily origins, to dwell on wholly sterile and man made stations in space where the astronaut, the modern priest of the technophallic religion, realizes his ancient dream to utterly escape the earthly processes the rest of us remain wallowing in. In the patriarchal heaven of the Hebrew Kabbalah, the world tree lost its paradox. It began to be pictured as one sided, with its roots above in the sky only. The earth side of the process of life, of illumination, is utterly negated. Not there. Interestingly enough, according to Mircea Eliade, in his study of shamanism, modern day male shamans worldwide rarely undertake the journey to the underworld common in old times. They have come to fear and avoid the realms of the living dead, of magic darkness and necessary worms as the domain of the Dark Mother. They eschew it. Instead, they concentrate on the journey to the sky, which involves considerable prestige for the shaman, being a trip into the home of the celestial patriarch, the big clean father in the sky. Anti earth, anti natural symbolism is distinctly related to religious dualism. From it arises a purely abstract worldview, as in mathematics, in which the man made symbols are not comprehended as part of a larger reality. They are comprehended as the reality. Dualism is a spectator sport. No one wholly involved in an ongoing life process can conceive of it in dualistic terms or objectify the experience. Dualism first arose among men who were functional spectators of the life created by women. They were the male priesthoods, men who did not give birth to creatures who would experience both ecstasy and pain and who would die. Men whose whole self appointed task was the uninvolved organization and manipulation of life into abstract and systematic terms for the sake of secular control and power. Male priesthoods are characterized by their dogmatic attempts to control a process they do not themselves, as spectators, participate in. Such mechanical, anti natural, remote control concepts of life have choked the springs of the living waters. The patriarchal Kabbalistic world tree, with roots exclusively in the sky, is wholly cerebral and unreal. To erase the earth side of the spiritual equation is to de energize the equation. To deny the earth roots of the world tree is to deny the serpent roots of the spine. Okay, I didn't just say one more time. The patriarchal Kabbalistic world tree, with roots exclusively in the sky, is wholly cerebral and um unreal. Let me just I thought I was gonna show y'all the Kabbalistic tree real quick, but it doesn't do it. Well, this is the Kabbalistic tree, but I was gonna show the world tree, but I don't, which is yeah, I love, yeah, yeah. Oh, it is the world tree, but I mean the one I want to show the one where you got they're saying how you got the roots coming out. I mean not the you know what I'm saying. Yes, Dr. B. You can't see the roots going down into the ground. That tree, that's the tree I was looking for. I thought it was on there as well. But okay. So I'm going to say it one more time. The patriarchal Kabbalistic world tree with roots exclusively in the sky is wholly cerebral and unreal. To erase the earth side of the spiritual equation is to de-energize the equation. To deny the earth roots of the world tree is to deny the serpent roots of the spine. And indeed, the biblical Hebrews set themselves against the serpent. And in doing so, they were deliberately opposing the Kundalini powers of the spine, the sex chakra, and the ancient brain stem. And so the Father God becomes both anti sexual and anti evolutionary. This is our grotesque situation today. An anti sexual God who is now worshiped as the creator of life. And wherever you find a puritanical God, you find also a pornographic God. For the human mind will strive for balance. And an anti evolutionary God is now worshiped as the goal of human progress, to be achieved not by organic growth of consciousness, but by worship of developmental machine programs and technologies. The immortality promised by the moon goddess was not a state of perfection or stasis in eternal light. She offers an ever renewed life like the moon's own, in which diminishing and dying are as essential to spiritual growth as birth and becoming. Her redemption is not from sin and matter, but from mental traps that block the self from its source. Mm. It is union of the opposites within the psyche, which brings release from the final power of death, which allows consciousness to pulsate from one dimension to another in the cosmic field. This is the only redeeming experience to be lived by an inner presence, the creator behind the ego. The Olympian male. If Father God religions are reactionary and anti evolutionary, the reason is simple. They are built in reaction to the original goddess religion, which dominated human thought and feeling for at least 300,000 years. By contrast, God has been conceptualized as a complete male for only about 3 to 4,000 years. For this reason, patriarchal religions must begin by denying evolution. For if that long stretch of human growth time was acknowledged, it would have to be credited as the evolutionary creative time of the Great Mother. To avoid this, the father gods just somehow appear, as it were, by spontaneous generation, and human life just suddenly appears with them, fully formed, sprung arbitrarily from the forehead of the he god, sometime around 2000 BC. The characteristic of an Olympian god, parentheses patriarchal, in contrast to a mystery god, matriarchal, is that the Olympian's form is rigidly fixed and always human. He has lost his animal forms and his magical ability to transmute from one energy shape to another. He has lost his alchemical properties. The Olympian is idealized, rationalized, aloof, deathless, and so ultimately he seems too geometric to move us. All poets have trouble making him interesting because he isn't. The Olympian does not evolve, he apotheosizes to the blare of trumpets. This means he is not born from woman or earth or matter, but from his own absolute will. He represents a static perfection in human form, incapable of transformation or ecstatic change. As a god, he is an intellectual concept. And so the energy exchange between all creatures and their magically shape changing deity is lost. The mystical evolutionary power connection is broken. God becomes mere idea and his world mere mechanism. In earlier Greek myth, the full sun was still Dionysian, though described as phallic fecundator of the receptive earth. The legend and drama of the Greek Dionysus raised fatherhood over maternity, but still yearned ecstatically for the mother as befit his Cretan origins. But in classical Greek mythology, Apollo, the Platonic intellectual ideal homosexual lover, was transformed into the static and immutable light, which is no longer cyclically rising and setting, coming into being and passing away. It exists absolutely, never changing. Apollo and Athene, redesigned as the motherless daughter of Zeus, together usher in the new law of paternity. Apollo declaring that the mother is no parent of that which is called her child. She is only nurse of the new planet seed that grows within her, while the real parent is he who mounts. Apollo freed himself from the bond with women, and so he is called immune from the night of death, which still and always confronts the all too human phallic and ecstatic Dionysus. Apollo becomes the spirit that rises above all change, away from the earlier subordination of spirit to physical laws and the dependence of human development on cosmic powers. Even Pallas Athene, who still retains traces of the Cretan and Libyan Great Mother as a remodeled Greek goddess, proclaims her purely Olympian existence free from all material desire and free from labor pains. As she boasts, she recognizes no woman, but only her father Zeus. Thus was the gestalt of the new patriarchy expressed by Greek male poets and dramatists. Athene's freedom from labor pains not only means that she refuses childbirth. The Olympians were gods of the newly established ruling elite, which did no communal work but was serviced by slave labor. The social structure represented by the Greek Olympians was patrilinear and class hierarchic. Thus, it lifted itself above the age old laws of biology and evolution to base itself on conceptual property power. But once the cult of the mother was overthrown, the cult of the infant Zeus needed a new rationalization. For a baby is a divine attribute of a divine mother, not a father. And so we have the ludicrous spectacle of the Olympian god trying to make himself into the mother. Quote, enter this, my male womb, end quote. Greek rebirth ceremonies, therefore, occurred through the father. They were correspondingly more and more connected with urban temples and the social hierarchic political relations, less and less with the seasonal blood renewal of the herd, crops and herds. The Greek Olympians were a worldly ruling elite rationalized into deities. They were the gods of the urban upper classes, just as Christianity in Europe was originally and for many centuries the court religion of the colonizing Roman invaders and the native aristocracy that rose up through cooperation with them. But such an abstract father god and his non magical rites did not appeal to the common sense of the common people. The peasants who worked the land in ancient Greece, just like the later European peasantry, knew very well from daily experience where life came from and where it went. The Greek common people in town and country continued to worship the mother goddess and take part in the mystery rites of Dionysus, of Demeter, and Persephone, of Artemis the moon. The commoners of later Rome worshipped at shrines of Diana, and the European pagans, um, and I'll say it again, parentheses, they say Latin pagani, meaning peasants of the land. But yeah, so the commoners of later Rome worshipped at shrines of Diana, and the European pagans continued well into the 17th century to celebrate the rites of the Great Mother of the Wiccan, of Diana, with her many names, and her brother, the goat god, Dionysus, Lucifer, the horned one. But the signature of the new Olympian male was that he represented not the peasants on land, not the masses of people, but the ruling elite who had the secular power to back him up. Where did this power come from? The triumph of patriarchy in the Bronze Age. Oh, I'm sorry. Where did this power come from? That was a question. The triumph of patriarchy in the Bronze Age corresponded with the development of heavy metals and their connection with professional warfare. Okay. Where did this power come from? The triumph of patriarchy in the Bronze Age corresponded with the development of heavy metals and their connection with professional warfare. Metallurgy, when it first appeared, was a highly ritualized and sacred art under guardianship of the goddess. It only belonged to the women with strong taboos attached to it. Metals were light, gold, silver, tin, copper, and were mostly shaped into jewelry, ornaments, ceremonial vessels. Undoubtedly, the mystery transformation of running hot metals into ornaments and tools using fire, molds, and ovens was first developed by women incidentally to their experimentation with pottery. Once developed into a distinct art, mining and smelting seem to have been the special task of men who lived apart under religious restriction or taboo. The only male figures found on Cretan seals were tiny bodies of smiths scratched beside the larger figure of the goddess. Sacred metallurgy served the Neolithic goddess and the people wisely, but in the Bronze Age, the ritual controls were broken. Metallurgy passed into the male sphere entirely, becoming a secular industry or a religious industry in service to the war, to the god of war. Dr. B says, "Oh, okay." Oh, yeah, I see that you have to run. But thanks for joining me. And of course, I'm gonna make sure that I upload this if you did want to check. Oh, but you have the book as well. But you have a great weekend. Talk to you soon. Okay, this opened the earth up for the first time to violent exploitation, including struggles between male groups for control over the earth's ores. Okay. Some evidence suggests, as John G. Jackson wrote, that iron smelting began in Central Africa. According to Merlin Stone, the process of mining and smelting iron ore was discovered by the Aryan Hittites circa 2500 BC. We don't know. The significant fact is that compared with the copper, gold, and bronze of the goddess cultures, iron was a much stronger and more abundant metal. In particular, it provided more efficient, heavier weapons. The Aryan people kept their iron smelting process secret for many centuries, as on it depend the more culturally and practically developed matriarchal peoples. The Indo-Europeans, for example, had no written language of their own, but adopted the script of the peoples they conquered. In this adapted script, the war god are the same. Their invention, pulled by a donkey for daily use in trade, the Anatolian Hittites and later Near Eastern warrior people were the first to harness up horses, turning wagons into war chariots. T.C. Lethbridge in Witches speculates that it was the development of metallurgy as a male art that brought the end of the mother goddess cultures. Larger and heavier metal weapons radically changed men's experience and techniques of war, giving advantage to the emerging professional warrior and changing warfare from a defensive tribal skill to a whole new game stressing aggressive offense and the spoils of victory. The new weapons mounted on wheeled wagons also allowed war to be carried on much farther from home. War became a specialty of roaming mercenaries while the women remained at the home village, maintaining the culture. In contrast, among Neolithic agricultural people, as among African tribal gardeners until quite recently, both women and men carried spears and other weapons with them into the fields, and if attacked, both sexes fought defensively. So, ironically, matriarchal culture was overthrown with the help of the new heavy artillery mined and stolen from Mother Earth. Perhaps this is why, even today, witches must not touch iron. Metal mining and smelting remain the most male dominated of all professions, and access to ores remains a major criterion of male power states. So long as Stone Age hunting was a major survival occupation, it kept men busy on the peripheries of the women's camp. Hunting kept men away from the home base, sometimes for long periods, but it also provided a ritual focus in the cave religion. Hunting gave men a spiritual and group identity within the worship of the Great Mother, but women's invention of agriculture and domestication of animals, together with settled village life, created a steady food abundance that rendered hunting more or less obsolete. There was suddenly a large male labor force hanging around needing occupation. Paintings found at Katal Hayuk in the most recent levels show men engaging in ritual hunting, dressed in leopard skins and accompanied by musicians. As Thompson notes, these paintings aren't of real Stone Age hunting, but of deer baiting and bull baiting, and are commemorations or images of nostalgia for the good old days of the hunt. Hunting was no longer necessary, and men could no longer find purpose and spiritual identity through it. Men's work around the settled village was at first unskilled labor helping the women. They cleared away brush, prepared the ground for cultivation by women. This is still so in Africa, where farming remains traditionally women's work. It is so among some Native Americans, Indonesians, and many others. Men felled trees and prepared timber for construction. Only later did they begin to take over the work of construction design itself, and they also slowly began to take over the care of breeding of livestock. With the buildup of stored grain, with ever increasing Neolithic abundance in settled village sites, appeared a new male profession, grain guardian. Organized marauding began in the later Neolithic, and as stored wealth increased and marauding increased, the males guarding grain supplies, organized more and more into a kind of standing army. Stock breeding also led to the discovery of paternity, of the male's role in breeding, and the importance of genetic selection. Originally, as Thompson points out, the domestication of animals was a religious act, an emotional act in which the animals were first domesticated because of their symbolic connection to the great universal religions of the goddess. As men took over stock breeding, the cattle herds took on a secular aspect. They became symbols of male wealth, power, and potency. It cannot be an accident that the word capitalism comes from the Latin caput or capitellum, originally referring to a head of cattle. This new, probably awesome male sense of paternity was the seed that was to grow into the Father God. But the actual growth of male power derived from men's increasing takeover and what can only be called industrialization of women's ancient crafts and tasks. Unlike the women, the men did not have to start from scratch. Millennia of women's work laid the groundwork for the male revolution of the Bronze Age. In a relatively brief time, men began not only to learn the skills and crafts of the women, but to make improvements in tools and methods, always in the direction of mass production. Men invented the plow, men invented the potter's wheel. It is very likely that women had not made these improvements because they were reluctant to break their direct connections with their materials. Craft was, like sacred ritual, a matter of rhythm and movement, of tactility. Women worked earth with hands and digging sticks. Women worked clay with their hands, shaping the clay spirals for bowls on their breasts. The more advanced tools and techniques developed by men interposed themselves between the body of the worker and the body of the mother substance. They objectified the task and secularized it, which women wouldn't do. All Bronze Age male improvements on women's ancient crafts were in the direction of speed up, mass production, quantity over quality, the factory, and the assembly line. For a time, men shared tasks but did not take them over. There must have been a truly egalitarian society with women and men working side by side in the same jobs, furthering together the abundance of food textiles, building materials, consolidating the first towns and small cities with their surplus production. But this was not to last. One of the strangest and bitterest facts of later male domination over women is that the major tools and industries of this domination were the inventions of women and first given to the men by the women. The ceramic, textile, and clothing industries, the medical and healing professions, farming and food industry, animal domestication, writing and calendric science, numbers and chemistry, religious symbol and ritual, all women's creations were taken over by men, then closed to women's entry, except under slave conditions. In the same way, men took over women's menstruation and childbirth rights, and then kept women away from these rights under taboo of death. We are told that men created civilization, but it is women's achievements in the areas of craft, cultural, and intellectual production that made that civilization possible. It was women who were biologically endowed to create human society, language, and culture. And then it was men who were socially endowed by women who turned around and declared women unfit for culture, using women's biological endowment as a justification for our oppression. Along with the pottery wheel and the plow, men in the Neolithic did invent one more thing: professional warfare. The more insignificant male activities were, the more women's activities produced wealth. I'm not sure I said that. The more insignificant male activities were, and the more women's activities produced wealth, the more some men were attracted to steal and other men attracted to defend the new acquisitions. The men discovered a new way to get together, and warfare was born. This was not, as Thompson describes it, the stylized agons of hunters over grievances, which ended in no or few deaths. This was institutionalized violence. This was war, the legal art of mass slaughter. In warfare, men refound the group and spiritual identity they had lost with the loss of the Stone Age hunting life. A new god, the male war god, could be erected to numanize it, to make it seem holy. But no one could deny warfare had its very secular, practical side. It was the primary builder of male wealth and thence and thence of a ruling elite. Most of all, for the first time, it gave men the power to control women, i.e., professional warfare allowed organized and iron armed males to destroy the ancient female collectivity. The period 6 to 4000 BC is the Magnus Annus of the Neolithic great goddess. Women had been at the top of traditional Neolithic society, but with the shift from religious magical authority to masculine military power, their influence collapsed and they became private property in the new trading and raiding society. Mesolithic society may have been the domestication of animals, and Neolithic society may have, I'm sorry, Mesolithic society may have seen the domestication of animals, and Neolithic society may have seen the domestication of plants. But what the age after the Neolithic sees is the domestication of women by men. The great mother of all in the Bronze Age was reified into a mere vessel of male seed. Woman in male eyes was no longer a powerful creator in her own right, but a piece of property. His new wealth, his new power over life, his new military ability to maim, terrify, and slaughter by the hundreds and thousands gave him a haughty contempt for life. Once he had, once there was a time when he had been in awe of life, but now he found how easy it was to push life around, to kill it. Man's new contempt for life extended to woman, of course, since for millennia she had stood as the numinous symbol of life's sacredness, life's holy power. But now he had the power, and he found he could also easily invent his own sacredness by fiat. God became male, a warrior male in his image. In early patriarchy, women's ancient community tasks were turned into slave labor. Women produced the surplus products on which men based their secular power and control. In the next stage of economic development, these slave tasks became the industrial occupations of the workers, while the ruling men and their wives were exempt from labor. The ruling men reserved for themselves the manly occupations of war, hunting, sport, and priestly observances, while workers kept the world going. Women's forced labor and later working class labor freed elite males to become lawyers, judges, doctors, artists, priests, and warriors, specialized, privileged occupations that all others are barred from. And whole bodies of law, religious doctrine, and custom are then assembled to forcibly maintain these men in these positions of power. Patriarchal law, often called the will of God, is in fact a wholly secular, cynical legal system designed purposely to maintain male power through institutional control of female energy. Mm. Under patriarchal legal, religious, and economic social systems, some men dominate others, but all men benefit from their organized domination of the community of women, which is no longer a community. Patriarchy breaks up the female collective by forcibly capturing and imprisoning each woman's female energy within the patriarchal family. Within this isolation cell, each woman's creative energy becomes servant energy, directed and owned by men. In the Hindu code of Manu, typical of all patriarchal family law, the woman must never be free from birth to death of subjugation to a male relative. She passes from the guardianship of her father to that of her husband and finally to her oldest son. They control her education, her property, the total disposal of her mind and body in life and in death. The ignobility of this male obsession with control is equaled only by its effectiveness. Under the code of Manu, the Hindu woman becomes a non-person. The breaking up of the powerful ancient women's collectives was the only way by which men could have broken women's strength and independence, but still keep a vaguely living body around to do the dirty work in bed and bathroom. What better way to turn the great goddess into a sex serf than by isolating each individual woman, keeping her under total control within the male dominated and defined family household where she is never allowed freedom of movement, of thought, of desire, where her body, her mind, her labor, and her children are seen as property, wealth belonging to the woman, to the man, where the only thing she can do with herself her sex serfdom is pass it on conscientiously to her daughters. Confucius, circa 600 BC in China, advocated the patriarchal totalitarian state. The functional basis of this state was defined as women's three obediences to father, husband, and sons. In the 20th century, Adolf Hitler in Germany articulated the three spheres of women children, Christian church, and kitchen. Codified in these slogans, which were also laws, is a simple fact. Between these two men lay over 2,500 years of patriarchal society built and maintained worldwide entirely by the exploitation of women's biological creation and physical labor. Whatever we see of male civilization seems to be built fascistically on women's backs. The goddess had been all powerful, but she was the mother of sons as well as daughters. Sons came from her body, were nourished by her breast, and it was not her desire that men should be degraded or destroyed. Under matriarchy, men were not reduced to mechanical units, to slave labor, or to subhuman objects. She knew that she was the parent and did not have to enforce unnatural religion with unnatural law. It is I who adorneth the male for the female. Her son was also her lover. His systematic degradation would have degraded her, who desired only free and graceful worshippers. In no goddess religion known were people ever depicted on their knees, but patriarchy must maintain by force an unnatural system. Since the supreme creator is a male, woman must be redefined as male's property, i.e., as wife. In fact, the very idea of a male creator God carries within itself the necessity for some kind of tightly controlled class caste society, because it is only through the creation of life, through human mothers, now passive and powerless, that the male God can claim glory for himself. He does not go through the dangerous episode of childbirth in his own person. He uses women to do it for him. Then, contrary to the truth, he claims that he is the almighty creator. The woman, at best, is patronized for her role as divine housewife. The sacred sphere of women's daily communal work and ritual is destroyed as women are isolated individually in men's households and women's industries, and labor are exploited to build male empires. With the further destruction of the rights of the death goddess, with their prohibition and or co-optation by the male churches, with moral and legal suppression of the ecstatic ceremonies of Soma, Pythonic divination, and pagan cults of celebratory rebirth of all things, little remains of the goddess in patriarchal culture but a wife of tamed or nervous sexuality and utterly desecrated because isolated mind. Okay, son's victory over the dark mother. It's 10:26, so I am going to go ahead and end right there. I will, okay. Yeah, and I just gave the I'm sorry, before I end it, I'll just say, our next chapter that we'll be reading is entitled Son's Victory Over the Dark Mother. And that's Son SUN over the Dark Mother. Catch you next Friday.